Blood-curdling screams echoed through Emma's mind as she stood frozen in the school courtyard, her 6-year-old hands trembling around the red lunchbox. Other children's laughter felt like daggers piercing her silence. Inside that innocent container lay a desperate cry for help that would unleash a nightmare no one could imagine. Before we continue, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Feel free to subscribe as well. We'd be glad to have you here with us. Emma sat alone on the concrete bench while dozens of children played tag and soccer across the school courtyard. "Come play with us, Emma," called her former best friend Lucy. But Emma just shook her head sadly. Their joyful shouts and laughter seemed to come from another world, one she could no longer access safely. Sarah Mitchell observed her 6-year-old student from the classroom window, her heart aching at the dramatic transformation. "What happened to you, sweetheart?" she whispered to herself. Emma had once been the brightest star in her class, always eager to participate, quick to smile, and first to help struggling classmates. Now fear had stolen her childhood innocence completely. Emma's small fingers constantly picked at her cuticles until they bled, her nervous eyes darting toward the school entrance every few minutes. She checked the large clock above the main door obsessively, counting down the minutes until dismissal with visible dread. "Please, not yet," she whispered to herself as 3 o'clock approached, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Sarah noticed how Emma jumped violently whenever doors slammed or children raised their voices during recess games. "Why don't you join us?" asked Tommy, reaching out his hand to Emma during a group activity, but she recoiled, as if his touch might burn her. "No, thank you," she mumbled, shrinking further into her corner. Inside the classroom, Emma's academic performance had plummeted from A's to barely passing grades within weeks. "Emma, can you tell me what 7 plus 3 equals?" Sarah asked gently during math time. The child stared blankly ahead, her lips moving silently as if having a conversation with invisible terrors. I don't know," she finally whispered. Emma's nervous habits had multiplied into a catalogue of anxiety symptoms that broke Sarah's heart daily. She bit her fingernails down to the quick, leaving bloody cuticles. "Does that hurt, honey?" Sarah asked, noticing the wounds. Emma quickly hid her hands behind her back, shaking her head. I'm sorry, she repeated, as if apologizing was automatic. Sarah approached Emma gently during lunch break, settling beside her on the bench with a warm smile. "Emma, sweetheart, would you like to talk about anything? I've noticed you seem worried lately." But the child became evasive immediately, her eyes darting away like a frightened rabbit. "I'm fine, Miss Mitchell. Everything's fine at home," she whispered unconvincingly. Emma barely touched her sandwich during lunch, pushing the food around her plate without taking more than a few small bites. "Aren't you hungry?" Sarah asked with concern. "I'm not supposed to—" Emma started, then stopped abruptly, covering her mouth with her hand. "Not supposed to what?" Sarah pressed gently, but Emma just shook her head frantically. During afternoon activities, Emma isolated herself in corners and avoided participating in group work that she once enjoyed. "Would you like to help me pass out the crayons?" Sarah offered, trying to engage her. "I can't," Emma replied barely audibly. "I might break them and then—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears of pure terror. Sarah decided to observe Emma more closely throughout the day, documenting concerning behaviors in a private notebook. "Dear God, please show me how to help this child," she prayed silently. During math lessons, she noticed fresh bruises on Emma's thin arms when her sleeves rode up slightly. The marks were finger-shaped and dark purple, telling a story of violence. Emma accidentally dropped her bright red lunchbox during dismissal as children rushed toward the exit doors. "Oh no!" she cried out in panic as the container hit the concrete with a loud crash. Sandwiches, crackers, and juice boxes scattered everywhere, but something else caught Sarah's attention immediately. A crumpled piece of paper that fluttered in the afternoon breeze. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to hear more stories like this one. Sarah carefully examined the disturbing drawing, her hands trembling as she recognized the desperate cry for help hidden in Emma's artwork. The word fear was scrawled repeatedly around the crying figure, each letter darker and more frantic than the last. "This isn't just a child's imagination," she whispered to herself, feeling her heart break for the little girl's obvious suffering. She approached Emma gently, kneeling down to the child's eye level with the drawing in her hands. "Emma, sweetheart, can you tell me about this picture?" But the moment Emma saw the paper, terror filled her eyes and she became hysterical. "Give it back! Please give it back!" she screamed, frantically snatching the drawing before running toward the school building. Sarah hurried to the principal's office, her mind racing with concerns about Emma's dramatic personality change and the disturbing artwork. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to speak with you about Emma Collins immediately," she said, closing the office door behind her. "I believe this child is in serious danger, and we need to take action before something terrible happens." Principal Henderson looked up from her paperwork with concern etched across her face. "I was hoping you'd come to see me about Emma," she replied gravely. "Her academic performance has declined rapidly over the past month, and I've received several calls from concerned staff members. The cafeteria workers say she barely eats, and the librarian noticed her crying during story time yesterday." Sarah decided to contact Emma's parents immediately to arrange a meeting and discuss the child's alarming behavioral changes. She pulled out Emma's file and dialed the home number, her fingers shaking slightly as she prepared for what might be a difficult conversation. "Someone needs to know what's happening to this little girl," she murmured, listening to the phone ring on the other end. During the phone call, Emma's mother, Lisa, seemed nervous and evasive, speaking in hushed, fearful tones as if afraid of being overheard. Is Emma in trouble?" Lisa asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Mrs. Collins, but I'm concerned about some changes in her behavior," Sarah explained gently. "Could we schedule a meeting to discuss how we can best support Emma?" Lisa agreed to meet, but sounded extremely reluctant, her voice shaking noticeably. "I need to check with David first," she said hesitantly. "He handles all the school matters now." There was a long pause before she continued, "Could you call back tomorrow? I'll ask him what time works best." The line went dead abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at the phone in confusion. Sarah sensed something deeply wrong with Lisa's fearful tone and the way she deferred all decisions to her husband. No loving mother would sound so terrified when discussing her child's well-being at school. "Why does she need permission to meet with her daughter's teacher?" Sarah wondered aloud, making notes about the strange conversation. The fear in Lisa's voice reminded Sarah of domestic violence training she'd received. Emma continued to isolate herself at school and drew more disturbing pictures during art time, each one more frightening than the last. "What are you drawing today, Emma?" Sarah asked during creative time. Emma quickly covered her paper with her arms. "Nothing," she whispered. "Just scribbles." But Sarah caught a glimpse of dark figures and more words spelling "help" in shaky handwriting. Sarah began documenting Emma's behavioral patterns meticulously and kept copies of the concerning artwork she created in a secure file. She photographed each drawing with her phone, noting the dates and Emma's emotional state when creating them. This evidence might save her life, Sarah told herself, carefully storing the documentation. Every picture told a story of increasing desperation and fear. Emma exhibited panic-like symptoms when other children raised their voices or moved too quickly near her during classroom activities. "Tag, you're it!" shouted Billy during indoor recess, playfully touching Emma's shoulder. The child screamed and collapsed to the floor, hyperventilating. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," she cried repeatedly, rocking back and forth as Sarah rushed to comfort her. At the end of the school day, Sarah watched Emma leave and noticed how the child's entire demeanor changed to one of pure dread as she approached the pickup area. Emma's shoulders slumped, her face went pale, and her hands began shaking uncontrollably. "Please don't make me go," she whispered to herself, not realizing Sarah could hear. The transformation from scared child to terrified victim was heartbreaking to witness. David Collins arrived for the parent-teacher conference instead of Lisa, his smile wide and charming as he extended his hand to Sarah. "So sorry Lisa couldn't make it," he said smoothly. "She's not feeling well today, but I'm very concerned about Emma's welfare." His perfectly pressed suit and confident demeanor seemed designed to impress, but something about his eyes made Sarah uncomfortable. He dismissed Emma's behavioral changes with a casual wave of his hand, suggesting Sarah might be overreacting to typical childhood behavior. "All kids go through phases, right?" he chuckled. "Emma's probably just adjusting to having a new father figure. These things take time." His tone was condescending, as if Sarah were an inexperienced teacher who didn't understand normal child development patterns. When Sarah showed David the drawing with fear written repeatedly around the crying figure, his charming facade cracked momentarily. His jaw clenched, and his eyes flashed with unmistakable anger before he quickly forced his smile back into place. "Well, that's interesting," he said through gritted teeth, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the paper. The transformation lasted only seconds, but Sarah caught it. David quickly recovered his composure and claimed Emma had an overactive imagination, probably influenced by something scary on television. "You know how kids are these days," he laughed nervously. "They see one horror movie trailer and suddenly they're drawing monsters everywhere." But his explanation felt rehearsed, and Sarah noticed sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool classroom temperature. Lisa arrived 20 minutes late to the meeting, appearing anxious and avoiding eye contact with both Sarah and her husband. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, sliding into her chair like a shadow. Her hands shook visibly as she smoothed her skirt, and Sarah noticed a faded bruise partially concealed by makeup on her left cheek. "Traffic was terrible," she added weakly, though David's expression suggested this excuse wasn't acceptable. David immediately took control of the entire conversation, answering all questions about Emma and not allowing Lisa to contribute meaningfully to the discussion. "My wife tends to worry too much," he said, with a dismissive laugh whenever Lisa tried to speak. "I handle all the important decisions in our household." Lisa's mouth would open as if to respond, then close again when David shot her warning looks. Sarah observed Lisa's fearful body language around David and noticed how she flinched whenever he spoke sternly or moved too quickly. When he placed his hand on her shoulder, in what appeared to be an affectionate gesture, Lisa stiffened as if expecting pain. "Isn't that right, honey?" David would ask, his grip tightening slightly until Lisa nodded in agreement with whatever statement he'd made about their family life. When Sarah suggested Emma might benefit from professional counseling to help with her anxiety, David became visibly defensive and insisted nothing was wrong with his family. "We don't need outsiders interfering in our personal business," he stated firmly. "Emma just needs more discipline at home, and I'm perfectly capable of providing that." The word discipline carried an ominous undertone that made Sarah's blood run cold. Lisa remained silent throughout most of the meeting, only nodding mechanically when David made statements about their supposedly happy home life. "We're a very close family," David declared, while Lisa stared at her hands in her lap. When Sarah asked Lisa directly about Emma's behavior at home, David answered before his wife could speak. "She's been having some minor adjustment issues, nothing serious." The couple left abruptly when Sarah persisted about getting Emma professional help, with David firmly stating they could handle their own family matters. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Mitchell, but we don't require any outside assistance," he said coldly, standing up and pulling Lisa to her feet. "Emma will be fine once she learns to follow the rules better." His grip on Lisa's arm was tight enough to leave marks. David made a subtle but unmistakable threat about Sarah minding her own business before they left, causing Lisa to look even more frightened. "I hope you understand the importance of respecting family privacy," he said quietly, leaning close to Sarah's desk. "It would be unfortunate if unfounded concerns caused unnecessary problems for everyone involved." Lisa's eyes widened with terror at his words, and she began trembling visibly. Sarah realized that both Emma and her mother were likely victims of David's controlling and possibly violent behavior as she watched them leave. The way Lisa walked slightly behind David, her head down and shoulders hunched, painted a clear picture of abuse. "Dear God," Sarah whispered, "that little girl and her mother are living in hell." She knew she needed to take action before it was too late. Sarah contacted Detective Marcus Rivera, who specialized in child abuse cases, after finding his number through the school district's emergency resources. "Detective Rivera? This is Sarah Mitchell from Riverside Elementary. I need to report suspected child abuse involving one of my students." Her voice shook as she explained Emma's situation. "I believe this little girl is in immediate danger, and her mother might be a victim too." Rivera listened carefully to Sarah's concerns over the phone, taking detailed notes about Emma's behavioral changes and the disturbing artwork. "Can you bring me copies of those drawings today?" he asked seriously. "What you're describing sounds like classic signs of severe trauma." His voice carried the weight of experience dealing with similar cases. I'll meet you at the station in an hour if possible. The detective examined copies of Emma's disturbing drawings spread across his desk, recognizing familiar patterns from previous abuse cases he'd worked. This child is definitely crying out for help, he told Sarah grimly. The repetitive use of the word fear and the isolated figures are textbook indicators of ongoing trauma. He photographed each drawing carefully, adding them to Emma's growing case file with meticulous attention to detail. Rivera explained the legal requirements for investigating suspected child abuse and the significant challenges of building a solid case without concrete evidence. Unfortunately, we can't just remove a child based on drawings and behavioral changes alone, he said with frustration. We need medical evidence, witness testimony, or direct admission of abuse. Sarah's heart sank as she realized how difficult it would be to save Emma legally. He immediately began conducting thorough background research on the Collins family and discovered troubling information about David's past that raised serious red flags. Computer records showed David had lived in 7 different states over the past 5 years, never staying anywhere longer than 18 months. This pattern suggests someone running from something, Rivera muttered, printing out David's residential history. People don't move this frequently without good reason. Rivera learned that David had a sealed juvenile record for violent behavior and had been arrested twice as an adult for domestic disturbance calls. Though charges were dropped both times, the pattern was concerning. The victims refused to press charges, Rivera noted, recognizing the familiar cycle of abuse and intimidation. But where there's smoke, there's usually fire. He began contacting police departments in David's previous cities of residence. Neighbors reported hearing shouting and crying from the Collins house late at night through anonymous tips, but no one had formally complained to police. We hear them fighting almost every night, one elderly neighbor admitted reluctantly. Sometimes the little girl screams, but we didn't want to get involved. Rivera documented each statement carefully, knowing that witness testimony could be crucial for building a case against David. Rivera interviewed Emma's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Peterson, and learned that Emma was previously outgoing, happy and social before David entered her life 18 months ago. She was like sunshine, Mrs. Peterson recalled sadly. Always laughing, always helping other children, never met a stranger. The dramatic personality change coincided perfectly with David's arrival in Emma's life, confirming Rivera's growing suspicions about the timeline of abuse. The detective discovered that David married Lisa only 18 months ago, shortly after her first husband died, in what was officially ruled an accidental death. That's quite a coincidence, Rivera thought, requesting the accident report from the previous jurisdiction. Lisa's first husband had allegedly fallen downstairs in their home while Lisa was at work. I need to look deeper into this supposed accident, he decided grimly. Social services revealed they had received an anonymous tip about the Collins family several months ago, but couldn't find sufficient evidence to investigate further. The caller said they heard a child crying for help, but when we visited, everything seemed normal, the caseworker explained. David was very cooperative, Lisa seemed fine, and Emma didn't show obvious signs of abuse. Rivera realized David was skilled at hiding his crimes. Rivera felt a chill of recognition as this case reminded him of one he'd failed to solve years earlier, where a child suffered because he couldn't gather enough evidence in time. Not again, he whispered, remembering 7-year-old Michael Torres, who died before Rivera could build a strong enough case. I won't let another child slip through the cracks. The memory of his failure fueled his determination to save Emma and Lisa. The detective felt a strong calling to protect Emma and prayed for wisdom and guidance in handling this delicate situation. Lord, please show me the path to save this family, he whispered in his empty office. Emma's case became his top priority as he worked late into the night, knowing that every day David remained free was another day of potential horror for the innocent victims trapped in his web of control and violence. Emma's grandmother, Margaret, became increasingly worried when Lisa cancelled Emma's regular weekend visits for the 3rd consecutive time without any reasonable explanation. I'm sorry, Mum, but Emma can't come this weekend either, Lisa had said in their last brief phone conversation 3 weeks ago. Margaret sensed something terribly wrong in her daughter's voice, fear, exhaustion, and a trembling quality that hadn't been there before David entered their lives. Margaret tried calling Lisa multiple times over the following weeks, but her calls went unanswered or were intercepted by David with increasingly elaborate excuses. "Lisa's not feeling well," he would say curtly, or "Emma's too busy with school activities." When Margaret pressed for details, David became hostile. "Maybe you should respect our family time instead of constantly interfering," he'd snap before hanging up abruptly, leaving Margaret staring at her phone in shocked confusion. Suspicious of David's flimsy excuses and growing more worried by the day, Margaret drove to Emma's school to observe her granddaughter from a distance during recess. She parked across the street and watched through the chain-link fence, expecting to see Emma playing happily with her classmates. Instead, she witnessed a heartbreaking scene that confirmed her worst fears about what was happening to her beloved granddaughter behind closed doors. She was shocked to see Emma's dramatic physical and emotional changes, noting how thin and fearful the child had become in just a few months. The vibrant, joyful little girl who used to run into Margaret's arms every weekend had been replaced by a frail, nervous shadow. "My God, what has he done to you?" Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched Emma sit alone, isolated from the other children's games and laughter. Margaret approached Sarah after school, introducing herself as Emma's grandmother and expressing her deep concerns about Emma's welfare and her daughter Lisa's sudden unavailability. "I'm Margaret Stevens, Emma's grandmother," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Something terrible is happening to my family and I don't know how to help them." Sarah recognized the desperation in the older woman's eyes immediately, seeing the same fear she'd observed in Emma and Lisa. Sarah carefully shared some of her observations while respecting confidentiality, confirming Margaret's worst fears about the dangerous situation Emma was living in. "I can't share specific details due to privacy laws," Sarah explained gently, "but I can tell you that Emma's behavior has changed dramatically, and we're very concerned about her well-being." Margaret nodded knowingly, having suspected the worst, but hoping she was wrong about David's true nature. Margaret revealed that Emma used to pray with her every weekend and was always excited about their visits together, describing a completely different child. "She would run to me shouting, 'Grandma, Grandma,' and we'd bake cookies and read Bible stories," Margaret recalled through tears. "Emma loved our prayer time before bed. She said it made her feel safe and loved." The contrast with Emma's current fearful state was heartbreaking and confirmed the timeline of abuse. The grandmother told Sarah that David had recently forbidden Emma from mentioning their visits or talking about any family activities outside the home. "The last time I saw Emma, she whispered that she wasn't allowed to talk about our visits anymore," Margaret explained. "David told her that grandmothers who asked too many questions might not be safe for little girls to visit." Sarah's blood ran cold at this obvious manipulation and isolation tactic. Margaret realized that Emma had been systematically isolated from all sources of support and love outside David's control, cutting off her lifelines to safety. "He's deliberately separating Emma from everyone who loves her," she said, with growing anger. "First, he stopped the weekend visits. Then he limited phone calls, and now Emma acts afraid to even mention my name." The pattern was clear and terrifying in its calculated cruelty. She described how Emma used to be joyful and talkative, but seemed different during their last brief encounter months ago, like a frightened animal. "Emma barely spoke during that last visit," Margaret remembered sadly. "She kept looking toward the door like she expected someone to burst in and punish her." The transformation from happy child to terrified victim had happened gradually, making it harder for Margaret to initially recognize the signs. Margaret and Sarah agreed to work together to find a way to help Emma escape her dangerous situation before it was too late. "We can't let this continue," Margaret said firmly. "Emma is my granddaughter, and I won't stand by while that monster destroys her." Sarah nodded in agreement, knowing that sometimes informal networks of caring adults could accomplish what the official system couldn't handle quickly enough to save a child. The grandmother decided to confront the situation directly by showing up unannounced at the Collins house to demand access to Emma, regardless of David's threats. "I'm going over there right now," Margaret declared with determination. "He can't keep me from seeing my own granddaughter forever." Sarah watched the brave woman leave, praying that Margaret's courage wouldn't put both grandmother and granddaughter in even greater danger from David's escalating control and violence. If you're enjoying this story, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to hear more stories like this one. Margaret arrived unannounced at the Collins house and marched up to the front door with determination, refusing to be turned away without seeing Emma. She rang the doorbell repeatedly until David answered, his fake smile faltering when he saw her stern expression. "I'm here to see my granddaughter," she announced firmly, "and I'm not leaving until I speak with Emma and confirm she's safe and healthy." David initially tried to turn Margaret away with his usual excuses, claiming Emma was napping and couldn't be disturbed right now. "This really isn't a good time, Margaret," he said through the barely opened door. "Emma's been sick all week." But Margaret pushed past him into the foyer, her voice rising with anger. "If you don't let me see Emma right now, I'm calling the police to do a welfare check." When Emma finally appeared at the top of the stairs, she looked frightened and wouldn't naturally hug her grandmother, which broke Margaret's heart completely. "Hello, Grandma," Emma whispered, remaining frozen on the staircase. The child who used to launch herself into Margaret's arms now stood rigid with fear. "Come give Grandma a hug, sweetheart," Margaret coaxed gently, but Emma glanced nervously at David before slowly descending the stairs like a condemned prisoner. Margaret noticed Emma flinched violently whenever David entered the room and kept her eyes downcast throughout the uncomfortable visit, never making direct eye contact. When David moved too quickly or spoke sharply, Emma's entire body would tense, as if preparing for a blow. "How's school going, honey?" Margaret asked. But Emma only nodded silently, her hands trembling visibly. The transformation was more heartbreaking than Margaret had imagined possible. During a brief moment when David stepped into the kitchen to get drinks, Emma desperately grabbed her grandmother's hand and whispered urgently, "Help me, Grandma." The words were barely audible, but they confirmed Margaret's worst fears about what was happening in this house. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she silently mouthed please before quickly releasing Margaret's hand and stepping away when footsteps approached from the kitchen. David returned quickly with forced cheerfulness and cut the visit short, claiming Emma needed rest and had homework to complete before school tomorrow. "I think that's enough excitement for today," he said firmly, placing his hand possessively on Emma's shoulder. The child winced at his touch. "Emma has a big test tomorrow, don't you, sweetheart?" Emma nodded obediently, but Margaret saw the fear in her granddaughter's eyes as David's grip tightened slightly. Margaret reluctantly left the house, but parked her car down the street to observe the house and gather evidence of what was happening inside. She positioned herself where she could see through the living room window while remaining hidden behind another vehicle. "I'm not giving up on you, Emma," she whispered, pulling out her phone to document anything she might witness. The waiting felt endless, but Margaret was determined to see the truth. Through the window, she witnessed David shouting at Lisa while Emma cowered in the corner, covering her ears as her stepfather's rage exploded. Margaret watched in horror as David grabbed Lisa by the arms and shook her violently while screaming words Margaret couldn't hear clearly. Emma tried to make herself invisible, curling into a ball on the floor while the adults fought above her like warring giants. Margaret immediately called Detective Rivera to report what she had observed and provided him with Emma's desperate plea for help. "Detective Rivera, this is Margaret Stevens. I just witnessed David Collins physically assaulting my daughter while my granddaughter watched in terror." Her voice shook with rage and fear. "Emma begged me to help her. We can't wait any longer to act." Rivera listened intently, taking notes about Margaret's first-hand observations. Rivera explained they needed more concrete evidence to take immediate legal action, but assured Margaret they were building a strong case against David. "What you witnessed is valuable, but we need medical evidence or multiple witness statements to get an emergency removal order," he explained apologetically. "David's smart about hiding his abuse, and courts require substantial proof before separating families." Margaret's frustration mounted as she realized the legal system moved too slowly to save children in immediate danger. Margaret realized that Emma's disturbing drawings were literal cries for help, and that the situation was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Every scrawled word fear represented a real moment of terror that Emma experienced daily in that house. "How many times has she tried to tell us?" Margaret wondered aloud, feeling guilty for not recognizing the signs sooner. The drawings weren't just childhood imagination, they were documentary evidence of ongoing trauma. The grandmother decided she couldn't wait for the legal system to slowly build its case, and began planning her own intervention to save Emma and Lisa. Someone has to protect them right now, she determined, watching David pace angrily in front of the window. Margaret knew the risks of taking matters into her own hands, but Emma's whispered plea for help echoed in her mind. I won't let another day pass with them in danger. Sarah implemented special art therapy sessions in her classroom, hoping Emma would reveal more about her home situation through drawing and creative expression. Today we're going to draw our feelings, she announced to the class, distributing colored pencils and paper. Remember, there are no wrong answers in art. She positioned herself near Emma's desk, ready to observe and document whatever disturbing imagery the traumatized child might create. The other students eagerly began their projects, but Emma stared at her blank paper with visible anxiety, her small hands trembling as she picked up a black crayon. Emma created increasingly disturbing artwork, showing scenes of violence and fear, which Sarah carefully documented as evidence of ongoing abuse at home. One drawing depicted a large dark figure, looming over two smaller ones, with the word hurt scrawled repeatedly around the margins. Another showed a house with all the windows colored black and no escape written in shaky letters across the bottom. Sarah photographed each piece secretly, her heart breaking as she witnessed Emma's trauma expressed through these desperate artistic cries for help that no adult had yet been able to answer. Other students began noticing Emma's extreme reactions to normal classroom activities like raised voices or sudden movements throughout the school day. Why does Emma always jump when we play? Asked Katie during recess. When Tommy accidentally dropped his textbook with a loud thud, Emma screamed and dove under her desk, hyperventilating. It's okay, Emma, Sarah soothed, kneeling beside the terrified child. You're safe here. But Emma's eyes remained wide with terror, as if she expected punishment for being startled by the innocent noise. Emma started having full-blown panic attacks during routine activities, confirming Sarah's growing suspicions about severe psychological and physical trauma at home. During morning announcements over the intercom, Emma would curl into a ball and cover her ears, whimpering softly. "Make it stop. Make it stop," she would whisper repeatedly. Sarah recognized these as classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder in children. The fact that such a young child exhibited these severe reactions indicated prolonged exposure to violence and terror that no innocent child should ever endure. The teacher provided Emma with extra attention and support throughout the day, without drawing unwanted attention from other students or parents who might report back to David. Sarah created a special helper system that allowed her to keep Emma close during transitions and potentially triggering activities. "Emma, would you like to help me organize the art supplies?" she would ask, giving the frightened child a safe space near the teacher's desk. She also established subtle hand signals that Emma could use to request help without drawing attention from classmates. During lunch, Emma accidentally revealed that she often went hungry at home and wasn't allowed to eat certain foods without permission from David. "I'm not supposed to eat without asking first," Emma whispered when Sarah encouraged her to finish her sandwich. "David says food costs money, and little girls need to earn their meals by being good." The revelation made Sarah's blood boil with rage at the psychological torture this innocent child endured daily. Denying food to a growing child was a form of abuse that demonstrated David's complete control over every aspect of Emma's existence. Sarah began discreetly providing Emma with snacks and encouraged her to eat during school hours when she felt safe from David's watchful eyes. She kept granola bars, crackers, and juice boxes in her desk drawer, offering them to Emma under the guise of helping the teacher with inventory. "Would you like to help me test these new snacks to see if kids would like them?" Sarah would ask. Emma would eat hungrily, as if she hadn't had a proper meal in days, which was probably closer to the truth than Sarah wanted to acknowledge. Emma started lingering after school, clearly reluctant to go home and face whatever punishment or violence awaited her there each day. "Do you need help cleaning the classroom, Miss Mitchell?" Emma would ask, her voice small and hopeful. Sarah's heart broke as she realized Emma viewed school as her only sanctuary from David's abuse. "Of course, sweetheart. You're such a good helper," Sarah would reply, allowing Emma precious extra minutes of safety. The child would work slowly, obviously trying to delay the inevitable return to her nightmare at home. Sarah noticed Emma praying silently at her desk before leaving each day, her small hands clasped tightly together as she sought divine protection. The child's lips moved wordlessly, and tears often streamed down her cheeks during these desperate moments of faith. "Please keep me safe," Emma whispered once, not realizing Sarah could hear her. "Please help Mommy. Please make the bad man go away." These innocent prayers revealed the depth of Emma's terror and her mature understanding that she and her mother needed supernatural intervention to survive. Emma drew a picture of herself praying for help and protection, showing remarkable faith despite her young age and traumatic circumstances at home. The drawing depicted a small figure kneeling beside a bed with hands folded in prayer, while dark shadows lurked outside the window. Above the praying figure, Emma had drawn a bright light with the words, "God help me," written in her careful handwriting. Sarah realized that Emma's grandmother must have taught her to pray, giving the child her only source of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. Sarah recognized that Emma's prayers and faith were her only sources of strength in an otherwise hopeless situation, filled with daily violence and terror. The child's ability to maintain hope and seek divine intervention demonstrated remarkable resilience that most adults wouldn't possess under similar circumstances. "This little girl's faith is stronger than mine," Sarah reflected sadly. Emma's continued belief that God would help her and her mother escape David's abuse showed a spiritual maturity born from desperate necessity rather than normal childhood development. The teacher began praying regularly for Emma's safety and for God to provide a way to rescue both the child and her mother from their abusive home. Sarah found herself staying after school to pray in her empty classroom, pleading for divine intervention on behalf of her traumatized student. "Lord, please protect Emma and Lisa," she whispered repeatedly. "Show us how to save them before it's too late." Sarah felt called to be part of God's answer to Emma's prayers, even if it meant taking risks that might jeopardize her own career or safety. Detective Rivera conducted nighttime surveillance outside the Collins house, positioning his unmarked car across the street with a clear view of the living room windows. At 9:47 p.m., he witnessed David's violent behavior through the partially open curtains as the man grabbed Lisa by her hair and threw her against the wall. Rivera immediately began recording with his phone, documenting the assault while his heart raced with the urgency of the situation. "Come on, give me enough evidence," he whispered, knowing that clear video proof could finally provide the concrete evidence needed to arrest David and rescue both victims from their nightmare. He carefully documented every instance of domestic violence he witnessed, but Rivera knew it still wouldn't be enough to ensure David's arrest and conviction in court. The lighting was poor, the video quality grainy, and defense attorneys would likely argue that the footage was inconclusive or taken without proper warrants. "Damn bureaucracy," Rivera muttered, watching David pace angrily while Lisa cowered on the floor. He needed either medical evidence of abuse, multiple witness testimonies, or a victim willing to testify, none of which seemed likely given David's intimidation tactics and the family's obvious terror. Rivera observed Lisa attempting to move toward the front door, but David physically prevented her from escaping by blocking her path and shoving her backwards. Through his binoculars, Rivera could see Lisa's mouth moving as if pleading or arguing, but David's response was swift and violent. He backhanded her across the face with enough force to knock her down. "She's trying to leave," Rivera realized, his hand moving toward his radio. The detective understood that Lisa's failed escape attempt would likely result in severe punishment for both her and Emma, escalating an already dangerous situation. Through the window, Rivera witnessed Emma cowering in the corner of the living room while David raged at Lisa, demonstrating the child's constant exposure to domestic violence. The 6-year-old had made herself as small as possible, pressing against the wall with her hands covering her ears in a futile attempt to block out the screaming. Rivera watched in horror as David pointed at Emma while shouting at Lisa, clearly using the child as a threat. The sight of the terrified little girl witnessing such violence filled Rivera with righteous anger and strengthened his resolve to save this family. The detective called for backup and prepared to intervene when David's violence escalated beyond what he could safely ignore without risking lives. "This is Rivera requesting immediate backup at 247 Maple Street," he radioed quietly. "Domestic violence in progress with child present." However, he knew that by the time backup arrived, David might have seriously injured or killed Lisa, and Emma would be left alone with her abuser. Rivera weighed his options carefully, knowing that premature intervention without sufficient evidence might actually make things worse for the victims in the long run. David suddenly noticed Rivera's surveillance car parked across the street and quickly closed all curtains, cutting off the detective's visual access to the ongoing abuse inside. Rivera cursed under his breath as the house went dark, realizing that David was more observant and paranoid than he'd anticipated. "He knows someone's watching," Rivera muttered into his radio, updating backup on the situation. The fact that David had spotted surveillance suggested he was experienced at evading law enforcement, which raised additional red flags about his criminal history and the potential danger he posed to his victims. Rivera lost direct visual contact, but continued hearing shouting, crying, and unmistakable sounds of physical violence coming from inside the house through the thin walls. The sounds were muffled but clearly indicated ongoing assault, furniture breaking, objects being thrown, and Lisa's terrified screams punctuated by Emma's crying. Rivera felt helpless listening to the violence while being unable to see exactly what was happening or how severe the injuries might be. "Back up, where are you?" he radioed desperately, knowing that every second of delay could mean permanent damage or death for the victims inside. A neighbor finally agreed to provide an official statement about the frequent nighttime disturbances and sounds of violence from the Collins home after Rivera approached her door. "It happens almost every night," Mrs. Chen admitted reluctantly, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. "The screaming, the crying, things breaking. We hear it all through the walls." She described months of disturbing sounds that escalated in frequency and intensity since David had moved in. "I should have called police sooner, but I was afraid of getting involved," she confessed, guilt evident in her voice. Rivera learned from Mrs. Chen that David had threatened Lisa that Emma would suffer worse consequences if she attempted to leave or seek help from neighbors. "I heard him shouting that if Lisa ever tried to run away or call for help, he would make sure Emma paid the price," Mrs. Chen revealed with trembling hands. She described overhearing David tell Lisa that accidents happen to little girls whose mothers don't cooperate. The explicit threats against Emma explained Lisa's complete compliance and terror, as any mother would endure abuse herself to protect her child from worse harm. The detective realized that David was using Emma as leverage to control Lisa and prevent her from escaping or reporting the abuse to authorities. This psychological manipulation was particularly insidious because it exploited Lisa's maternal instincts and made her an unwilling accomplice in her own victimization. "He's got them both trapped," Rivera understood grimly. David had created a system where any attempt by Lisa to seek help would result in increased violence toward Emma, making escape seem impossible for the terrified mother. The strategy was calculated and revealed David's sophisticated understanding of psychological control. Rivera felt the overwhelming weight of responsibility as he sat in his car listening to the violence continue inside the house, praying for divine guidance. "God, please show me how to save them both," he whispered, his hands shaking with frustration and righteous anger. He understood that traditional law enforcement approaches might be too slow to prevent serious injury or death, but acting without proper legal authority could compromise any future prosecution. The detective found himself caught between following protocol and saving lives, a position that tested both his faith and his professional ethics. The detective knew with certainty that David's violence was escalating rapidly and feared that time was running out before someone suffered permanent injury or death. The sounds from inside the house had grown more violent and frequent over the past hour, suggesting that David's rage was building to a dangerous crescendo. Rivera realized that Emma and Lisa might not survive another week in that house, let alone the months it might take to build an airtight legal case. Tomorrow might be too late, he acknowledged grimly, knowing he would have to take extraordinary risks to save this family from their escalating nightmare. Emma collapsed during morning circle time, her small body crumpling to the classroom floor as other children gasped in alarm and confusion. Sarah immediately rushed to Emma's side, finding the child unconscious with a high fever and labored breathing that suggested serious medical distress. "Call the nurse immediately," Sarah shouted to her teaching assistant while cradling Emma's limp form. The other students watched in frightened silence as their teacher carefully checked Emma's pulse and breathing. "It's okay, sweetheart, you're safe now," Sarah whispered, though she feared Emma's collapse might be the result of severe trauma finally overwhelming the child's fragile system. The school nurse's thorough examination revealed multiple healing fractures in Emma's ribs and arms, extensive bruising in various stages of healing, and unmistakable signs of severe physical abuse spanning several months. These injuries are consistent with repeated blunt force trauma, Nurse Peterson explained grimly, while photographing each injury for documentation. X-rays showed old fractures that had healed improperly, indicating a pattern of violence that had been ongoing long before anyone at school recognized the signs. The medical evidence painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse that no child should ever endure, confirming everyone's worst fears about Emma's home situation. Sarah stayed with Emma throughout the medical examination, holding the child's hand and providing emotional support while the nurse meticulously documented all injuries as potential evidence. "You're so brave, Emma," Sarah whispered, as the frightened child submitted to the necessary but invasive medical procedures. The nurse's clinical documentation would be crucial for any legal proceedings against David, but Sarah focused on comforting Emma during this traumatic but necessary process. Every bruise and fracture told a story of violence that made Sarah's heart break with rage and determination to protect this innocent child from further harm. Emma finally broke down emotionally and told Sarah about the ongoing abuse at home, revealing the full extent of David's violence and psychological control over both her and her mother. "He hurts us every day," Emma sobbed, her small body shaking with fear and exhaustion. "Mommy tries to protect me, but he's too strong and too angry." The words poured out of Emma like water through a broken dam, as months of forced silence finally gave way to desperate honesty. Sarah listened with tears streaming down her face, documenting every detail while providing the emotional support Emma needed to continue speaking her truth. The traumatized child revealed that David had explicitly threatened to kill her mother if Emma ever told anyone about what happened at home. "He said if I ever told my teacher or grandma about our house, he would hurt Mommy so bad that she would never wake up again," Emma whispered through her tears. The threat had been repeated so often that Emma believed it completely, explaining her desperate attempts to protect her mother through silence. David's psychological manipulation had trapped both victims in a cycle of fear where seeking help seemed more dangerous than enduring continued abuse. Sarah learned that David's violence had been escalating dramatically in recent weeks, with more frequent and severe beatings of both Emma and Lisa almost daily. "He gets angry about everything now," Emma explained with the weary voice of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "If the dishes aren't clean enough, if Mommy talks too loud, if I make any noise when I'm supposed to be invisible." The escalation suggested that David was losing control of his carefully constructed facade, making him increasingly dangerous to both victims as his paranoia and violence intensified beyond his previous patterns. Emma described being locked in dark closets for hours as punishment, often without food or water, when David was angry with her behavior or simply wanted to torture her. "Sometimes I stay in the closet all day and all night," she revealed, her voice barely audible. "I try to pray like Grandma taught me, but the dark is so scary and I get so hungry." The sensory deprivation and isolation were forms of psychological torture designed to break Emma's spirit and ensure her complete compliance with David's demands. Sarah realized that Emma's fear of enclosed spaces and constant anxiety made perfect sense given these horrific punishment methods. The child revealed that David forced her to watch him hurt her mother as psychological torture, using Emma's love for Lisa as a weapon against both victims. "He makes me stand in the corner and watch when he hits Mommy," Emma whispered, covering her face with her hands. "He says if I close my eyes or try to leave, he'll hurt her even worse." This calculated cruelty demonstrated David's sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation, using Emma's helplessness and maternal bond to inflict maximum trauma on both victims simultaneously while ensuring the child's silent compliance through guilt and terror. Emma admitted that she drew the disturbing pictures as her only way to cope with the overwhelming fear and trauma she experienced daily at home. "Drawing the scary feelings makes them a little smaller inside my head," she explained with heartbreaking wisdom. "When I can't sleep because I'm scared, I draw the bad things, and then they're on the paper instead of in my dreams." Her artwork had been a desperate attempt at self-therapy, a way for her young mind to process trauma that would challenge adult psychologists to treat effectively. Sarah finally understood that the fear drawings were Emma's desperate attempts to communicate her need for help and rescue when direct communication felt impossible. Every scrawled word and disturbing image had been a coded message from a child who couldn't speak directly about her abuse, but hoped that caring adults would recognize her silent pleas. "You were so brave to draw those pictures," Sarah told Emma gently. "They helped us understand that you needed help, even when you couldn't tell us with words." The artistic cries for help had indeed saved Emma's life by alerting multiple adults to investigate her dangerous situation. Emma begged Sarah not to tell anyone about the abuse, still terrified that David would follow through on his threats against her mother, despite being safely away from him. "Please don't tell anyone what I said," she pleaded desperately. "He'll kill Mommy if he finds out I told you our secrets." Even in the safety of the nurse's office, David's psychological control continued to influence Emma's thinking and behavior. Sarah gently explained that keeping Emma's secrets would actually put both her and her mother in more danger, while getting help from police and social workers was the only way to keep them truly safe. Through her tears, Emma revealed the most shocking truth of all. David wasn't actually her stepfather, but had been impersonating Lisa's deceased husband and holding them captive for months. "He's not really my new daddy," Emma whispered with trembling lips. "He did something bad to my real daddy, and then pretended to be him so Mommy would let him live with us." This revelation explained the timeline of abuse, David's sophisticated control methods, and why Lisa seemed so completely terrified and compliant. Sarah realized they weren't dealing with domestic violence, but with kidnapping, murder, and imprisonment by a dangerous criminal who had destroyed Emma's family. Detective Rivera received an urgent call about Emma's hospitalization and rushed to the hospital immediately, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread about what new information the traumatized child might reveal. "This is Detective Rivera. I'm on my way to interview Emma Collins about her abuse case," he radioed while speeding through traffic with lights flashing. Upon arriving at the children's hospital, he found Sarah and the medical team documenting Emma's extensive injuries with the careful precision required for legal proceedings. The sight of the small broken child surrounded by medical equipment filled Rivera with renewed determination to bring her abuser to justice and ensure her safety. Emma's shocking revelation about David's true identity completely changed the entire investigation and explained many previous inconsistencies that had puzzled Rivera throughout the case. "He's not my stepdaddy," Emma repeated to the detective with remarkable clarity despite her trauma. "He pretended to be someone else, so Mommy would trust him and let him live with us." This revelation explained David's paranoid behavior, his sophisticated manipulation tactics, and why he had no verifiable history in their community before 18 months ago. Rivera realized they had been investigating a phantom while the real predator hid behind a stolen identity. Rivera immediately understood they had been investigating the wrong person entirely, and that David was likely a dangerous fugitive with multiple identities and a criminal history spanning several states. "We need to run fingerprints immediately," Rivera told his team over the phone while staying close to Emma's bedside. The detective's mind raced with implications. If David was using a false identity, then everything they thought they knew about him was fabricated. This explained his frequent relocations, his lack of employment history, and his sophisticated methods of control and intimidation that suggested extensive criminal experience rather than typical domestic violence patterns. The detective quickly coordinated with federal databases to discover David's real identity through fingerprint analysis and learned he was wanted for several violent crimes in other states under different names. Within hours, Rivera received confirmation that their suspect was actually Robert Lynch, a career criminal with warrants for murder, kidnapping, and identity theft in 4 different states. "This man is far more dangerous than we realized," Rivera told his supervisor grimly. Lynch had a pattern of targeting recently widowed women with young children, suggesting Emma and Lisa were not his first victims, but potentially the survivors of a serial predator. Rivera's investigation uncovered that David had murdered Lisa's real husband 18 months ago to assume his identity and gain access to the family for his own twisted purposes. The supposed accidental death had actually been carefully planned murder, with Lynch studying the family for months before executing his plan. He killed Michael Collins and took over his life, Rivera explained to his team during an emergency briefing. The detective realized that Lisa's compliance wasn't just about protecting Emma from abuse. She was protecting her daughter from a murderer who had already proven his willingness to kill family members. Emma's testimony revealed that she had witnessed David threatening her mother with evidence of the murder, explaining Lisa's complete compliance and paralyzing fear throughout their captivity. "He showed Mommy pictures of what he did to my real daddy," Emma whispered to Rivera with heartbreaking innocence. "He said if Mommy didn't do exactly what he wanted, he would do the same thing to me." This explained Lisa's robotic behavior during school meetings and her inability to seek help. She wasn't just an abuse victim, but a hostage being controlled through threats against her child's life. Lisa had been protecting Emma by staying silent about David's crimes, believing that complete cooperation was the only way to keep her daughter alive in the hands of a proven killer. Rivera understood that Lisa's apparent compliance wasn't weakness, but incredible strength and maternal love under impossible circumstances. She had endured months of physical and psychological torture while maintaining the facade that David demanded, all to protect Emma from suffering her father's fate. The mother's sacrifice and courage in the face of such evil filled Rivera with admiration and renewed urgency to rescue both victims. Rivera immediately assembled a tactical team to arrest David, realizing the urgent danger both mother and daughter faced now that their secret had been exposed to authorities. "We move now," Rivera commanded his team. "If Lynch realizes Emma has talked, he'll either run or eliminate the witnesses." The detective coordinated with SWAT, federal marshals, and Child Protective Services to execute a simultaneous rescue operation and arrest. Every minute of delay increased the risk that Lynch would discover his exposure and either flee or commit additional violence against Lisa, who remained trapped in the house with him. Emma bravely led authorities to where David had hidden evidence of his crimes, including proof of her father's murder and documentation of other violent acts against previous victims. Despite her trauma and exhaustion, Emma provided crucial information about hiding places in the house that only she would know from her forced observations during captivity. "He keeps the scary pictures in a box under the floor in the basement," she told Rivera with trembling courage. Her testimony and guidance would provide the evidence needed to ensure Lynch faced justice for all his crimes, not just the abuse of Emma and Lisa. Margaret arrived at the hospital and finally embraced her granddaughter properly for the first time in months, promising that Emma would never have to face such terror again. "My brave little girl," Margaret whispered through tears of joy and relief. "Grandma's here now and no one will ever hurt you again." The reunion between grandmother and granddaughter was emotional for everyone present, representing hope and healing after months of separation and fear. Margaret's presence provided Emma with the family stability and unconditional love she needed to begin her long journey toward recovery from her traumatic ordeal. Police surrounded the Collins house as David realized his deception had been exposed through police radio chatter he intercepted on a scanner. Lynch attempted to flee through the back door, but was captured during a dramatic confrontation with tactical officers who had anticipated his escape routes. "Robert Lynch, you're under arrest for murder, kidnapping, and child abuse," Rivera announced as officers subdued the struggling suspect. Lisa was safely rescued from the house, where she had been tied up in preparation for Lynch's planned escape. Confirming that Emma's disclosure had prevented additional violence or potential murder. Months later, Emma drew a new picture showing her family safe and happy in their new home, with the words, "Thank you, God," written in her careful 6-year-old handwriting across the top. The drawing depicted Emma, Lisa, and Margaret holding hands in a circle of prayer, surrounded by sunshine and flowers instead of the dark imagery that had filled her previous artwork. As they knelt together in their living room for evening prayers, Emma's clear voice joined her mother's and grandmother's in gratitude for their freedom, safety, and the caring adults who had refused to ignore a child's silent cries for help. Their faith had sustained them through their darkest hours and now filled their new beginning with hope, healing, and the promise that love truly conquers evil. Please write in the comments if you enjoyed this story and tell us where you're listening from. Don't forget to give it a like, Subscribe to our channel, activate the notification bell, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.